Christ. 7 years of college down the drain. Might as well join the fucking Peace Corps.
Today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to Rob Elder, who's collected interviews with everyone from Kevin Smith and Danny Boyle to Peter Bogdanovich and John Waters in his new book, The Film That Changed My Life, 30 Directors on Their Epiphanies in the Dark. Stick around.
Hey, did you know that you can listen to the latest Mr. Media show right on your phone with the Stitcher app? Stitcher's smart radio for your smartphone. Mr. Media is on demand and on the go with Stitcher. Download Stitcher for your phone today. Get the free app at www.stitcher.com. That's STITCHER.com.
So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? Folks, you know that by now. That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview. You know, MrMedia.com, MRMedia.com. Stop by and check it out. There are nearly 700 archived celebrity interviews for your listening pleasure. The show is brought to you today by our new sponsor, Star Pirates. Star Pirates is a free online sci-fi game that I think you'll really enjoy playing. Give it a try today at www.starpirates.net. You must be at least 13 to play, which of course was, touch and go for me. Again, that's starpirates.net. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience of intense Fellini-esque college students who believe only they know the truth about cinema verite in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. My 14-year-old daughter is thinking a lot about college these days, and just last night she asked, "Why did you get a degree in film studies, Dad?" Good question, but I had to weigh telling her the truth with giving an answer that wouldn't distract her. I mean, what would be the sense in saying, well, because it was the easiest major I could think of, or because that's where all the prettiest girls were, or because those were the easiest classes in which to catch up on my sleep after working till midnight most nights at the Royal Park 4 theaters? Well, I've always loved getting lost in a movie. I'll start watching any film on TV, and from any point, and get absorbed in it. When I was a teen, my pal Bruce Kessler and I used to ride several miles on our bike and catch whatever was playing in East Brunswick or Princeton, which, for those of you who don't know New Jersey, are in opposite directions. I remember many life-changing moments in film. Animal House was a big one. It's the first time I ever literally fell down on the floor laughing so hard. Or believing that a man, Christopher Reeves anyway, could fly in the first Superman. Discovering that there is nothing more beautiful than a naked woman's breasts in a bathtub, thanks to Serpico. The start of months of nightmares following a screening of, I believe this was George Romero's Tales from the Crypt in the early 70s. Cursing like a Brooklyn-born sailor after meeting Tony Manero for the first time in Saturday Night Fever. Well, that made picking up Robert K. Elder's new interview collection, The Film That Changed My Life, 30 Directors on Their Epiphanies in the Dark, a sure thing in my life. Elder, who was on Mr. Media last year to talk about his book, Last Words of the Executed, has once again found an irresistible topic of conversation. And just listen to a few of the internationally celebrated film directors who shared their cinematic inspiration with him. Slumdog Millionaire's Danny Boyle. Clerks, Kevin Smith. Bend It Like Beckham's Gurinder Chattha. He'll correct me, I'm sure. Slacker's Richard Linklater. Mission Impossible 2's John Woo. Pink Flamingos, John Waters. A great bunch of directors going there. A lot of talent. So, Rob Elder, welcome back to Mr. Media.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you. It's weird. I was just thinking about that group, and I should have added when I was ticking off the movies that made such impressions on me, Pink Flamingos. First time I was ever physically nauseous and wanted to gag and throw up in a movie theater.
And I'm guessing that's in the was it during the last scene? Is that what we're talking about?
Oh my God, yeah. Ugh.
And for those of you who have not seen it, it's Divine actually eating dog crap. Yes, it's a stellar cinema moment, people.
Oh my God! I'm sorry I brought it up, but every time I see Pink Flamingos, I'm taken back, and that's what movies do. I'm taken back to the movie theater at the University of Miami, where I was a freshman, and we were exposed to, all kinds of Eric Rohmer's Claire's Knee that year, and all kinds of stuff. But that movie, never had an experience like that in a movie theater. I mean, I was just and there was a lot of stuff before it, leading up to it, that was,
just as disturbing.
Yeah, it really was.
Well, I like the list of movies that you did check off, including Animal House, which was filmed at my alma mater, the University of Oregon. And that director, John Landis, is in the book. He talks about the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. That was the film that made him want to become a director. And then Serpico, which is a film that I love, but I love that Al Pacino is shot in the face, and all you remember is a bare breast, which is fine.
Well, I tell you why I remember it. Besides being the first time I'd seen, bare breasts on a movie screen, 100 feet tall to a 12 or 13-year-old, but my dad took me to that movie, which I'm assuming was rated R at the time. And I had read the book. I'd read the Peter Maas book before seeing it, and I was already just a huge Peter Maas fan, and just overwhelmed with this very inspiring story of this New York cop, who fights corruption. But when the woman, I can't remember if she got in the tub or if we just see her in the tub, my dad actually put his hand over my face like he was protecting me. Now, I got to tell you, if I had a son, and I have a daughter, so I wouldn't do this, but if I had a son, I wouldn't be putting my hand over his face. Yeah,
well, all it does is draw attention to the fact, like, hey, whoa, and it just makes that even better. And the thing is, a couple of the directors in the book have like a similar experience. In fact, two directors, Guy Maddin and Adam McGoyan, told me that they found the films that changed their lives, Persona and then L'Âge d'Or, while surfing like art channels, like public access, like Canadian art channels, where they said, basically I was just surfing for skin. And Guy Madden, he told me, he said, like, yeah, it was literally like a slot machine in the corner of your living room when you were alone, you could just go over there and spin the channel and hope it comes up cherries.
I remember you point out that the two Canadian directors who had an interesting time with public television.
Yeah, well, but I think for us, it's HBO, because there are a few folks like Jay Duplass in the book. He talks about Raising Arizona. He talked about his exposure to film through HBO. We're having more people who have this life-changing experience either through HBO or video rental. And, if we want to talk about Skin, the two films that I remember, being in, how shall I say this? Being effective, being memorable in my young, testosterone-charged mind was About Last Night, where it's Demi Moore naked, and it's before she had breasts, which is even more interesting, before surgery stepped in. And then Something Wild with Melanie Griffith, and that is a movie that will totally mess with you, because it's sort of hot and awkward and steamy, and then Ray Liotta shows up, and it turns into the darkest film imaginable. So, like, a very conflicted experience with sex on film for me in the beginning.
I'm starting to think that I misdialed when I called up to Chicago, because I feel like I'm on the phone with my old pal Mr. Skin instead of Rob Elder. What do we? Maybe I need to patch him in to get us clear here. Yeah, well,
Jim would just go on and on about Fast Times at Ridgemont High. That's how you know we're different people.
That is Jim's movie of choice, is it not?
Yeah.
He loves that coming out of the pool scene.
Phoebe Cates. He'll never be the same.
We all have that moment. Well, so I know I allowed us to get pretty off track here, but now this book was a great idea. It's not hard to guess, but what did inspire it?
It actually took root, 13 years ago. I worked as an intern at dearly departed Premiere Magazine for Ann Thompson, actually, who was the West Coast editor at that time. And we were lucky because they let interns do a lot of stuff. And in fact, when I was there, X-Men was the big movie that was coming out, and nobody knew anything about comic book movies. There had just been a few, Blade and a decade before that, Superman, but it was before the big rush. And they said, hey, do you want to do this column where we just ask movie directors about if they had a superpower, what would it be? And I was like, awesome. And I just thought, like, you know what? My career largely has been driven by epiphany moments. I sort of know that now in retrospect. So Last Words of the Executed, which you talked about, is about epiphany moments, for lack of a better word. And then I run these two websites. It was Over When, Tales of Romantic Dead Ends, and then it was Love When. So they're the moments that you realize you're in and out of love. So because film is my first love, it just sort of dawned on me, like, well, what was that life-changing moment? What made people want to do film? What compelled them? And because that's my passion, and I love talking to directors, and directors, especially sometimes when they're on tour, want to do anything but talk about the movie that they're there to promote. So, what I would do is, I would find directors sometimes on tour, sometimes on not on tour, and just say, hey, tell me about this experience. And more often than not, they would just be happy to chat about it. Or, they want to talk about the film they're there to promote. And they said, you know what, but I would love to talk about, in John Woo's case, it was Rebel Without a Cause. Mm-hmm. For Danny Boyle, it was Apocalypse Now. So, call me up later. So I would do that. And then it just turned into a giant, basically, telephone game, because every director I talked to recommended another director I should talk to. So it was really, really great.
Well, I was going to ask you about a little of that. I mean, you did this entire book of interviews with John Woo, so I'm guessing that he was an easy get.
He was a very easy get, yeah. He's always hard to pin down just because he's between continents and all over the place. But, I mean, he's one of two people in the book that refuse to pick one film. Usually it's one film, but he picked Rebel Without a Cause and Mean Streets. And actually, I think I had already done the book, the John Woo book, John Woo Interviews for University of Mississippi Press, and I did this interview about Mean Streets, and he just sort of rhapsodized about Martin Scorsese and about how he loved all the scenes in churches, especially in Mean Streets. And it made me realize, like, that is why there's a church or shootouts in churches in almost every single one of his films, because he has this affinity for Mean Streets. And to make things even more confusing and interesting, John was raised a Lutheran. He's a very devout Lutheran, but he's in love with Catholic imagery. And at one point I said, John, did Martin Scorsese almost make you a Catholic? Which he sort of laughed off. But, think about it. All his imagery is Catholic.
Well, Rob, I want to take a quick break and come back and talk to you about Kevin Smith and Richard Linklater and Henry Jaglom and Peter Bogdanovich and many more. But, folks, this is Bob Edelman, and you're listening to the Mr. Media radio interview with Rob Elder, author of the book, The Film That Changed My Life, 30 Directors on Their Epiphanies in the Dark. And we will be right back.
Now, before I say goodnight, my sponsor would like to bring you an important message.
Ever thought of hosting your own radio show? Now you can by registering at blogtalkradio.com. While you're there, check out our selection of premium packages. To start your own show today, visit blogtalkradio.com.
Hi, this is Raquel Welch. Yes, that Raquel. And I'd rather stick needles in my ears than listen to one more minute of Mr. Media Radio. Ugh.
That wasn't very nice, Raquel. This is Bob Adelman, and you're listening to the Mr. Media Radio interview with Rob Elder, author of the new book, The Film That Changed My Life, 30 Directors on Their Epiphanies in the Dark. Now, I noticed, Rob, that a line could be drawn between some directors in the book, and you just mentioned, of course, that one would lead to another. One of the examples that struck me was that you interviewed Richard Linklater, who directed Slacker, and, of course, Kevin Smith, whose life was dramatically changed by Slacker.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and that actually is wonderful pure happenstance. One of them did not recommend the other one. I don't think the other one knew that I don't think Linklater knew that Slacker was in the book, and I don't even know if it was at that point, because again, it was sort of 5 years of a lot of planning. Pinning directors down is a full-time job in itself. But another example is Pete Docter, who won the Oscar for Up. He also directed Monsters, Inc. He talks about Peter Bogdanovich's Paper Moon, and Bogdanovich is in the film talking about Citizen Kane. So it's this really interesting little ecosystem where people sort of get to meet their idols. Kimberly Pierce talks about how The Godfather changed her life, and how, when Boys Don't Cry came out, Coppola was very nurturing to her. So she says, you always feel like an idiot, just professing your love for someone's work, but when you meet them, you just can't help it. And then you mentioned Henry Jaglom before. The film that changed his life was Fellini's 8½, and he told me this story about, he's a young, aspiring director, and he walked through First Class, and he notices Fellini sitting with his wife in First Class. And he was so scared he didn't say anything, and he regretted it for the rest of his life.
Well, and I had Jaglom was on this show about a month ago with his latest movie. It's called Queen of the Lot, and we can connect him to Peter Bogdanovich. They both are in your book. They both worked with Orson Welles, and now Bogdanovich is in Jaglom's recurring company of actors.
Yeah. And again, that was sort of strange and wonderful as well, because neither one of them said, "Hey, you have to talk to this guy." Kevin Smith said, "Hey, you need to talk to Richard Kelly, who directed Donnie Darko." And there were a couple other recommendations. And not everybody, picks up the phone after they're recommended, but it really did help the book grow, and I sort of talked to directors and had access I wouldn't have otherwise if people weren't so kind to me.
I got to ask you about talking to Kevin Smith. I mean, I've been a fan of his since the original Clerks, and have seen I just can't bring myself to watch his what's it called, Cop Out, or the movie he made with Bruce Willis and Tracy Morgan. I tried actually over the holidays to say I said to my wife, listen, the only Kevin Smith movie we have not seen is this one, and we're fans of Bruce Willis, we're fans of Tracy Morgan, why not watch it? And she said, oh, it's just supposed to be so awful. But anyway, that aside, Smith is so full of himself in an entertaining way. I just wondered what it was like to actually engage him in conversation where you're trying to ask questions and solicit answers and not have him take charge.
You kind of have to give yourself over to it. In fact, it's best to give yourself over to it, because the great thing about being a journalist and an author is you get the last cut. It's the one time where they don't have the last cut. And when I approach these directors, I say, listen, I just need 20, 30 minutes of your time, to talk about the specific film, and then I wait around for a few months, and usually it works. Occasionally, I will find a director, and we will be on the phone for 3 hours about one film, and Kevin Smith was one of those directors. Again, he loves Slacker, and his experience with it was a very visceral one. He was at a crucial point in his life where he kind of didn't know what he was going to do. It's the film that made him decide to go to film school and then drop out of film school. And there are two types of experiences that I found that directors have with the film that changed their life. And usually they see a film and they're like, that is amazing. I want to do something like that. Maybe I could never do that, but I want to be in that business. I want to, sort of be the dream maker, the image maker. And then the other type of director, and Kevin Smith falls into this category, is, that's a movie, I could do that.
Right.
He still loves Slacker. For him it's still this magical movie, but he was like, this is funny, but I'm funny too. I could do this. And
I love that quote from him, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and again, he's not the only one. That happened to a bunch of people in the film, or a bunch of people in the book as well.
I like that. I mean, that's, you and I both do nonfiction books for a living, among other things. And I mean, I used to look at that and go, I could do that. Why couldn't I do that? Whereas I look at a movie and go, whoa. I'm just like, and I don't want to, I find that I understand too much of how the magic is made now, having studied it in college and, been a student of it, that, sometimes it spoils it a little bit because, I want to sit down in that seat in the dark, whether it's at home or in a theater, at college, wherever it is, and disappear into the movie.
Yeah, well, and I was a reviewer for 5 years at the Chicago Tribune, and then a columnist after that, a film columnist. And my family would always say, "Oh, Rob, you just watch movies differently than we do." Oh, we just want, and I'm like, no, I watch them the same. It's just that I've seen so many more. It's not that I know more. It's just that I sort of enjoy them on multiple levels. So, you talk about how the sausage is made. You're talking to somebody that, when I researched these interviews, I would watch as many of the director's films as I could, and then the film that they were going to talk about, and then every commentary track I could find. So, I'm sort of really serious about it. But you're talking to somebody who sometimes prefers the commentary track. That's what a geek I am. I would almost, there are some films out there that are actually, it's a better commentary track than the actual film.
Well, and I got to give you credit. People, when you pick up the book, one of the things you see is Rob talking to these directors about their favorite film, and Rob actually knows just a little bit more than they do about some of them, and it's interesting, and not in a smart-ass kind of way, or I'm smarter than you, but in a way that the directors respond like, "Wow, is that true?" And he says, "Yeah," and then he adds to their understanding of their own favorite film, which is very cool to read.
I appreciate you noticing it. Yeah, I really, really, they were nice enough to give their time to me, so I figure it's only polite to really prep for the interview. And one of the examples I think you're talking about in the book is Danny Boyle, and we're talking about Apocalypse Now. Mm-hmm. And part of the legacy of that film is it was originally called The Psychedelic Soldier, and George Lucas was supposed to direct it. And instead, he chose to go off and direct a little film called Star Wars that I don't think anybody ever saw.
No.
No, it was a horrible failure. And I said, but there's still a link in there, because if you notice, Harrison Ford is in Apocalypse Now. He's got a small role, and if you notice on his lapel, his name tag says G. Lucas. And so, so that sent Danny scrambling back to the DVD player. So, just little sort of like tidbits, and I just love that sort of communal experience you can have either watching a film or talking about film.
Mm-hmm. Now, there were a couple movies that surprised me by these directors' devotion, because, in some cases, I just didn't get it. And I would have to say Jay Duplass picking Raising Arizona just left me scratching my head. I know there are people who love that movie. I've seen it at least twice, maybe a third time. It never does a damn thing for me. I just think I always come away thinking, what a freaking waste of time.
Well, and that what is really, really interesting is Raising Arizona and Fellini's 8.5 were the two most fought over movies in the book. So, I would approach directors, and in fact, I did a whole interview with Joe Swanberg, who did Hannah Takes the Stairs and whatnot. He also loved Raising Arizona. Edgar Wright, who directed Shaun of the Dead and Scott Pilgrim versus the World, also wanted to talk about Raising Arizona. So it has this sort of magical generational impact on a certain group of filmmakers, the same way that Fellini's 8.5 did, because Kim Pierce, that was her choice, first choice as well. So I don't know if there's a link between 8.5 and Raising Arizona, but if you could find one, in fact, if any of your listeners can find one, email me. So I totally want to know what it is.
Okay. Better give your email address if that's what you want.
It's just rob@robelder.com. It's very simple.
Okay. Now, were there directors that you would have liked to have interviewed for the book but couldn't reach or weren't available or just said no?
Well, the directors who said no are not in the book, so there's a lot of them.
But were there a lot? You've got 30. I didn't know how many you had to go after to get to 30.
Yeah, God, I don't even want to think about how many I had to go after. But the people that I really wanted to get, the film that changed my life is Reservoir Dogs. It was the first film in which I sort of, I experienced actually seeing a director's sort of force of personality and, DNA on the film. And I can even name the scene. And for those of you who have not seen Reservoir Dogs, I'm not going to ruin it, but it's the scene in which the undercover cop is learning to become an undercover cop. He's basically telling a story and then, learning the story, then telling the story, then telling the story in real time in front of the people. And then he's inside that story, and it was just this amazing piece of cinema. And I went after Quentin Tarantino, and I think he was too busy promoting Inglourious Bastards to pay me any attention. But then there were people who said yes, who I just chased for years and just could not make it happen. In fact, Peter Jackson was the first person who told me, he's like, I'd love to talk to you. And then he finished the last Lord of the Rings, and then King Kong, and then... what was the last one? The Lovely Bones. And I'm sure he will be in some future installment, but we could just, between the continents, not make it work.
Hey, I gotta ask you.
And then Robert Altman, by the way. Robert Altman was rude enough to die on me.
That bastard.
Yeah.
I gotta ask you, since you did spend 5 years as a film critic, anybody here who agreed to be in the book who you gave a bad review to one of their films?
I can't remember.
Oh, sure.
No, let me look. Well, but here's the thing, Bob. Like, I was a reviewer for 5 years, and it'll happen every once in a while that I'll be in a video store or going through like used movies, and I'm like, hey, this looks interesting. I'm like, did I see that? And I'll look, and on the bottom of the video box it'll say, a sleek action adventure, Robert K. Elder. I was like, I guess I saw that then. So you just see so many films that not all of them take. So let me look at the table of contents and let me get back to you. So go ahead and ask another question, then I'll.
All right. Well, yeah, I just have really just one more question for you, and that was this: of directors who are no longer with us, who obviously you didn't have the opportunity to even try to interview, who intrigued you most for this type of inquiry? Who would you have liked to ask this question of?
Well, most of them are sort of what we would consider, sort of historic directors, folks who passed away long before I even could do this sort of thing. But one of my favorite books is the Hitchcock-Truffaut book. It's Francois Truffaut interviewing Hitchcock at length. Really, really amazing book.
It's a wonderful book.
There's another one which kind of gets slammed around a little bit, but I just really love it. It's the Billy Wilder Cameron Crowe book, which is in the similar model. Cameron Crowe talking to Billy Wilder. There are a couple of people who either said yes or expressed interest and then passed away, sadly. One of them, and I just blew his name, directed The Sound of Music.
Oh God, I don't know. Oh, Blake Edwards. No.
He married Julie Andrews, which is close.
Yeah, okay. I knew there was a connection there.
It's kind of like directing Sound of Music. He directed Sound of Music. He directed. Bob, you're going to edit this out to make me sound smart, right?
No, not at all.
Okay, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Robert Wise.
Oh, I just went to IMDb. I was going to try to beat you to it. Okay.
Yeah. So Robert unfortunately passed away, and again, Robert Altman as well. He was in Chicago, and we met very briefly, and he followed up with a phone conversation, and then he died not long after his Academy Award. So that is that's always a regret of mine that I couldn't connect with him. But God, who else do I love?
Well, let that be a lesson to you. Don't win an Academy Award. It's death.
Yes, that'll happen. Career death and otherwise. But just I'm always interested in sort of sometimes just the strange little cult films that stick with us. God, like Harold and Maude. That director is not going to come to my mind. I'm not dirty like you are.
It's too early. I'm not going to look at it.
Bob Rafelson, like that would have been amazing, because Rafelson's movies, nobody made movies like him, 5 Easy Pieces,
right.
All those Nicholson sort of things. In fact, Criterion just released a box set of all of those weird, lovely films that Rafelson had a hand in, including Head, which is the Monkees film.
Monkees, yep. For which Rafelson and Jack Nicholson wrote a lot of the music.
Yeah, well, if you find the interviews and they're like, oh yeah, so you wrote the movie, and it was basically, yes, we got paid to smoke dope in a hotel room,
right,
for 2 weeks,
Yeah.
So,
nice,
but yeah, and by the way, also Terry Gilliam. I am a huge Gilliam fan, and Richard Kelly talks about Brazil being his the film that changed his life, and I actually had an email exchange with him, and then I think Heath Ledger died in the middle of production for The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, and I just lost him, and of course he had bigger issues than me. So I hope to connect with him on a second volume.
Reading was it Richard Kelly who picked Brazil?
Yes.
Yeah, reading about that, my wife has always loved Brazil. I've seen it 1.5 times. Never really got it, and it was. And in retrospect, it was always the title that threw me off. I just kept thinking, "What's the Brazil?" I don't know. It just wasn't, And after reading Kelly on Brazil, it was the one movie in the book that I hadn't really appreciated. That it made me want to go back and see it again and give it one more try.
Well, good, and hopefully, that's what I am hoping to do, is not necessarily change anybody's mind, but make them reconsider or see a film through somebody else's eyes, because that can make all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
John Landis has this sort of great ending line in the book about the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which of course is the film that changed his life, and he talks about how movies impact you, and it has everything to do about how old you are and where you saw it. And if I can find that quote, it'll be much better than me paraphrasing it. Let me see here. It's extremely important to know, and this includes movies now, that how you appreciate a movie has everything to do with your life experience at the moment when you see it, how you see it, and where you see it. And then he talks about 2001 and how some of that stuff dates, like the Velcro on the slippers of the stewardess, and then but still the power of that space station set to the Blue Danube is still really, really powerful. Mm-hmm. And he just says, it's just how old were you when you saw it, where were you, how did you see it? Movies are subjective. And it's really that sort of love that, again, I think propels the book.
This is a little off topic, but just think, as you were talking about 2001, I happened to hear Howard Stern yesterday talking to Seth Rogen about drug use, and Stern was saying, this makes a connection, bear with me for a second. Stern was saying that he was asking Rogen, who's a big marijuana smoker, if he had ever done LSD, and Rogen said no, and he asked Stern, have you? And Stern said, yeah, I did once. It was awful. It was just awful. And I always tell people, do not do that. It's just terrible. He said, but 2001 came out. I had to do it again because I had to see that movie on acid.
and we talked about Roger Ebert a little while ago. His movie review, his review of 2001 is very interesting because he was not over the top about it, and he talked about the people outside the theater who were really, really into it, and part of that was marketing. People forget that the first run of 2001 was just abysmal, and then they sort of retinkered and they cut the film a little bit, and they basically marketed it as a drug trip movie. In fact, all the movie posters say something like the greatest trip ever or something, and
right.
And again, your listeners are going to correct me on this, but it basically tied it to an acid trip, and then it was wildly successful.
Right. Well, whatever it takes, I guess.
Tapping into that counterculture.
Just don't encourage my daughter. I don't care what else you do, but just keep it away from my daughter. That's what I say.
Just don't show her Serpico. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, she won't get. Folks, listen. You can order Rob Elder's new book, The Film That Changed My Life, 30 Directors on Their Epiphanies in the Dark, at great bookstores everywhere, or order it right now at a great price at mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. And Rob, knowing you, I'm assuming there is a website affiliated with this?
Yeah, filmchangedmylife.com. So filmchangedmylife.com. And you can also email me there if anybody can find a link between, again, Raising Arizona and Fellini's 8.5.
Okay. Well, Rob Elder, thank you so much for coming back and joining us on Mr. Media today.
Bob, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And folks, for more original interviews with America's top nonfiction writers, surf over to our main website, mrmedia.com. Subscribe to Mr. Media on iTunes and never miss a show. Just search Mr. Media Interviews from within iTunes and subscribe for free. And while you're at it, please consider giving us a review. Give us a couple stars. It helps. You can also listen to the show with a piece of string and a tin can in many locations. If you've got an idea for a guest, a comment on today's show, or would like to advertise on Mr. Media Radio, email me directly at bob@mrmedia.com. That's mrmedia, mrmedia.com. You can also follow me on Facebook or on Twitter, twitter.com/Andelman, or on Facebook. Just search Mr. Media Interviews. Thanks so much for joining us today. Always appreciate you giving up a piece of your day and spending with us. Thanks for listening.
Hey, this is America Olivo, and whenever I'm not being terrorized in the movies, such as Friday the 13th or Circle, or terrorizing others, like in Bitch Slap, I'm avoiding dirty old men like Mr. Media. And if you see him, you should too.